My wife and I have seen various Toddler busy boards on the internet or at stores, but never found anything that had the features we wanted, so I set out to build one. What we came up with is this box with 4 activity panels, each with unique and engaging gadgets. Let me show you how I made it. One of the main features we wanted this box to have was removable activity panels that we could switch out over time. So the first step in the build was to make this frame which holds the panels. I start by cutting 4 20 by 20 inch squares of 1/2 inch plywood, plus 1 extra to make a template for cutting out the rest. This template is a frame that has an outside dimension of 20 by 20 inches and 1.5 inch wide sides. I cut the middle of this template out on the table saw, but honestly can't recommend this method for you at home, as there are many ways it can lead to serious kickback or injury. Because I know my saw well and anticipated potential risks, I felt that I could do it safely in my shop. I first made a cut on each side, leaving the corners attached, then removed the waste from the middle with a jigsaw. Had I cut all the way to the corner on the first pass on the table saw, once the middle piece was cut loose, it could easily move, bind the blade, and result in kickback. Now with the waste removed, I went back to the table saw to square it up on the inside corners. I then used double-sided tape to stick the template on top of the workpiece and a router to cut it out. I quickly realized that hogging out that much material was too much for my little trim router. Even when taking multiple shallow passes, you could really hear it screaming. So for the rest of the panels, I removed the bulk with the jigsaw, making sure I stayed inside my line, then trimmed it up with the router. The router setup is a 3/8 inch straight bit and guide bushing. The first pass is with a larger diameter guide bushing, which cleans up the rough jigsaw cut and takes the inside of the opening to final size. Next, I switched to a smaller diameter guide bushing and reduced the plunge depth of the router. This pass cut a rabbet along the inside edge of the panel, which will house the activity boards. I wanted to be able to take the box apart, but didn't want hardware showing from the outside. So to connect the 4 sides into a square, I glued a cleat onto one side of each panel. Screws will be driven through these cleats from the inside to hold each side together without glue. Smaller cleats were added to the top inside edge of each panel to connect to the top of the box. I used a dab of CA glue and accelerator to hold these cleats in place while the Titebond glue set up, so I didn't have to clamp each one. With the sides secured together, I align and attach the top, which is also 1/2 inch plywood. The bottom, which fits inside the side panels, is then placed in position and more cleats glued to secure it to. The last step in building the box frame is to round over all outside corners with the trim router. Next, I cut panels to fit into each side of the frame. These are sized to fit into the rabbet, but the corners must be removed to fit the rounded corners left by the router. This won't be seamed from the outside, so a simple chop with a chisel is all that's needed. After all parts are painted, I use window screen clips to secure the panels inside the rabbet. Now that the box is done, it's time to add some activities to it. There are endless ideas for items that can be attached to the panels. We decided to make an abacus for one side and fill the other 3 up with various hardware and interactive objects. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button below and leave a comment. I would love to hear what you think. Many of the objects were simply screwed to the panel using the mounting holes on the hardware, while others required a little more creativity. For this fidget spinner, I pried the thumb pads off, then found a machine screw that fit through the middle of the bearing. A nut secured it in place, and a second nut acted as a spacer to hold the spinner off the board a little. The screw could then be inserted in a hole drilled through the panel and secured with another nut. To mount these faucet handles, I clamped a bolt in the jaws, which is designed to clamp onto the stud of a water valve. The bolts were fastened to the board with a nut, and then the handles tighten onto the exposed threads. Adjusting the tightness of the nut and bolt can change how easy it is to turn the handle. Mod Podge was used to paste on pictures of familiar people and places, which were then covered with wooden squares that can be lifted up to reveal the picture. The last feature was an afterthought that I came up with during the build, as I realized there was a perfectly good light switch that needed something to do. So I found a way to power LED strip lights with a battery contained inside the box. To wire these lights, they came with this infrared controller. There's already a plug installed on the end of LED string. So that's just a 4-pronged plug. Plugs right into there. Then it came with a AC power supply with these barrel connectors that you would plug into here. I wanted to power it with a battery pack like you'd use to charge your cell phone. This outputs 5 volts. The lights need 12 volts. So I found this USB voltage converter on Amazon. So that plugs into here, and this is a converter that goes from 5 volts to 12 volts and has a barrel connector on the end. So we plug the USB into the battery pack, barrel connector plugs in to the LED controller, and using the remote that came with the lights, I'll power on. However, I wanted to use the light switch that I installed as an activity on the outside of the box to be able to control the lights. What I did is you can buy these barrel connector leads. I bought a package off Amazon that had both male and female leads. I want the battery power to the female lead into the switch, then the male lead to come out of the switch into the LED controller. So these barrel connectors had 2 wires coming out of each, black and red. So I took the black off the male into one side of the switch, and the black off the other lead into the other side of the switch, then the 2 neutrals, tied them to each other. Then the male lead plugs into the controller. Just leave that on. Then I don't have to use the remote. I can just use the switch to go on and off. I realized that most battery packs have an auto shut off and won't turn the lights back on after they have been off and the battery timed out. I did some searching and found one with an always on feature, and it has been working well. I used hex nuts as spacers between the box and the top, leaving just enough space for the light to shine through. Finally, I attached the bottom by marking the location of the cleats and driving in a screw. The bottom can be easily removed by taking out these 4 screws in order to switch out the panels or recharge the battery for the lights. You will also notice here that there is a Lazy Susan attached to the base. We originally planned on using the box this way, but found it was a little too unstable for a young kid learning to stand, so I removed it before we put the box to use. This was a really rewarding build and has been a huge hit in our house. I hope you enjoyed watching and picked up some ideas if you make one yourself. If you do build one, I would love to see pictures of how yours turns out.